Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. This video is entitled Magic, Mystery, Knowledge, and Unknowing. So even that sort of title, it does sound kind of mysterious, but I want to really embrace mystery as I think really the heart of and really central to magic and esoteric arts in general. So, really the desire for knowledge is very important. If you're going to be serious about operating in esoteric areas or occult philosophy, you're really going to need to seek a lot of knowledge. And it's not that easy to find either. You want to really deeply penetrate in it to learn to understand. And that desire for understanding is important. But as we start off with this, we need to recognize that there's different types of knowledge and that our preconceptions can be very limiting. So for example, the modern worldview, which is essentially atheistic materialism, what that is basically the view that only matter and energy exist. So under that view, spirituality is basically psychology, and then psychology is just brain chemistry because the brain is material. And that's the ultimate nature of it. So, there's a reaction to that to say, wait a second, if we're going to practice magic or we're going to practice astrology, we do need to take the spirituality seriously. So I think the tendency is to react to sort of a pop, we could pejoratively call it New Age approach, which is very superficial, or an atheistic materialistic approach, and say, okay, we're going to be serious about this, and the only model that's really easily available for that is an academic approach. Now, the problem with that is that, yes, it's serious, yes, it can be rigorous, but ultimately the academic approach is very much grounded in atheistic materialism, so it's antithetical to the spiritual. And also this is an approach that, typically if you're going to take an academic approach to magic or astrology, what you end up doing is looking at sources and tracing the sources back, and this manuscript was created this date, and critical. This is all very useful, but it's really background stuff. What, again, following this academic approach, which is, again, ultimately atheistic materialistic, we're looking at, okay, this was created by some individual person at some particular time. We're going to follow the transmission. We're going to look at the social, ramifications of this. But ultimately, it's fictional. I mean, this is not really practical knowledge because it's impossible. And very often, and not always, the academic approach is antithetical to any kind of practical knowledge. So it's studying about something as opposed to actually doing it. So, and again, that's a very limited type of knowledge. So another problem is basically the view that there's an objective, unchanging reality out there. This is sort of the scientific view. If we can figure out what it is, we can use our instruments, we can use our gain knowledge, we can see exactly what's happening out there, and it's an unchanging objective reality. And so part of that is if it works for one person, it works for everybody. If you do an experiment, it needs to be replicable. It works the same way for everybody. There's these strict rules that we can be conscious of that are universally applicable. Now, the only problem with that is a very small, discrete type of knowledge. And so within that, we're not taking into consideration subjective. Individual perspective, if something only works for one person or a few people, only works part of the time, then it's not really considered to be valid. And there's also a lack of understanding of intuition, which is not following a linear logical process that's conscious. There's a lot of unconscious processes. It's essentially, I did another video on this on intuition in astrological prediction where I go into more detail. But there's a lot of these unconscious processes that are actually very valuable. Intuition is actually a very valuable and useful way of knowing. It's essentially, I think, a deep patterning process, being able to see immediately, instead of going A to B to C to D, going A to Z, and being able to see that unconscious patterning very quickly. So the other problem we have is the tendency to see the acquisition of knowledge as basically being labeling things. So that you find something, you stick a label on it, and or in a more sophisticated way, you've assigned a concept. That's that. I have a label for this. I know what the model is. And this is really an interesting process because once you do it, it's sort of like a bug on a pin. Once you label something, you've got it, you've killed it. so to speak. You've frozen it into that particular concept or that particular label. It's also very safe. You know, you don't have to have the subjectivity, the emotional punch that goes along with it, the mystery or whatever. You've got everything all taken care of. You understand it because you've labeled it. Just really, you're abstracting, you know, and assigning, you know, this incredible, you know, piece of reality, and you're saying, okay, it's just this. So, you know, oh, that's just a fertility ritual. I've heard that a million times. I mean, you really could say that about Thanksgiving, for example. Oh, it's a harvest festival. It's like, but really, if you think about your experience of Thanksgiving, it's, you know, in some people, it's, you've got to deal with your horrible family. Other people, it's wonderful. You know, Thanksgiving, you know, it's the harvest, all that. There's an incredible more to it than just that's a harvest festival. That's pantheism. I had that someone saying that to me the other day. To me, everything is alive. Everything has a spirit. And that was just dismissed, like I said, that's just pantheism. So again, these are all problems in terms of knowledge. Instead of basically being an understanding of reality, we're only getting these little pieces of reality, this very objective reality, or like I said, conceptual reality, non-practical, non-engaged. These are all ways of not really seeing the true reality that's in front of us. Now, so conceptual knowledge, though, is useful. It's important, but we don't want to stop with that conceptual knowledge. We don't want to think that conceptual knowledge is a way of, if once I've labeled it, then I understand it fully. Particularly if I'm doing it at sort of arm's length. That objectivity requires that, and not really participating. Subjectivity is considered to be bad. I actually think that subjectivity can be extremely useful and very important because you're actually engaging with the thing, you're actually doing it, you're actually having it affect you, and that brings a much broader knowledge. So when you use that in addition to the conceptual knowledge. So when we get into the esoteric field or spiritual seeking, we can contrast conceptual knowledge to gnosis. Gnosis is this knowing through experience, knowing through direct contact, as opposed to knowing conceptually. The Sufi term is al-doka, which means tasting, which I think really, you know, if you think about it, you could read a lot of newspaper articles or go on, you know, the social media and read all sorts of stuff about some particular type of coffee, how wonderful it is or how terrible it is, but you really don't know it. You really haven't come to know what it really is until you've actually experienced it. You drink that coffee, you're not going to understand what it's like and really not have that true knowledge of it. So in the Sufi, you know, path, the tasting, the doka, the gnosis is a mystic experience, not just of a piece of reality, but of the one. So this is really the highest type of knowing. And this goes along with intuition as being a non-conscious process of understanding. So what I would urge, though, is an even further step, which is beyond this intuition and beyond practical experience and knowledge, there's a step also of not knowing. And that's really kind of the key point that I want to make in this video, is that this not knowing, this mystery, this willingness to not know is a key part of magic and the esoteric arts. First of all, you know, it's sort of inherent in the esoteric or occult. It just basically means hidden. And Picatrix says, you know, that you need to understand, this is from Picatrix, from the prologue. It says, first of all, you must understand that this science has been hidden by the philosophers, and they have not wished to disclose it to humanity. Nay, they have hidden it with all their might, and whatever they have said about it was phrased in secret words and deeds and signs and similitudes, as though they have spoken of other sciences. So it's hidden, it's not known. Again, Picatrix says, you should know that this science is named magic. We call magic whatever is done by man, by which sense and spirit follow by its action in all their parts, or by which marvelous things are done, so the senses are led by them, contemplating and marveling. Magic is difficult to understand because it uses connections hidden from our senses and sight. This is because these connections are divine powers placed before things to lure them upwards, and this science is too deep and strong for the intellect. So essentially, again, what we're dealing with magic and astrology are these hidden connections, the hidden occult sympathies and spiritual connections of all things, which are not obvious, which are not apparent, and which are not something that can be easily known or discovered. So that really is inherent in the definition of astrology and magic and alchemy, these esoteric arts. So they can only really be partially known conceptually or even experientially. We're going to work with it. We're going to learn about it, in a sense from the books. We can learn about the outward forms of things. Then we penetrate into it experientially, and then we also have to be willing to not know what's going on. Because if we say I know what's going on, we're only getting a partial understanding of it, and we never really can plumb the most deep roots of it. So by labeling in linear logic, let's say this is A, and A equals A, and A is not B, this just isn't a full experiencing of reality. We've all had, I think most of us at least have had the experience that you can love and hate someone at the same time, yet love and hate they're not the same thing. They're opposed to each other. They're paradoxical. So the reality of it is that only a discrete portion of reality. This is not to throw out conceptual knowledge or scientific knowledge, but to recognize that this is only a small part of reality. And the type of knowing and the type of knowledge that's used for that, even if it's done properly and experientially, is never going to accurately cover all of reality. It has a much broader, paradox is much broader. Because paradox, really divine, is paradoxical. It transcends linear logic. It binds everything together, good and evil, life and death. I mean, again, how can something, the one, contain those things? Again, this is the divine power of paradox. So the magic and the other esoteric arts partake of this deeper underlying unity, and therefore, by definition, are paradoxical. In order to be unified, they must be paradoxical, they must be mysterious. And if you try to pin it down, you'll lose the power and you're losing that underlying unity. So that complete understanding is really never possible. And, the true master really has to acknowledge it many times that they don't know, they don't understand what's happening. Certainly magic is surprising almost always, and astrological prediction can never be entirely pinned down by set rules. So, again, this is not an embrace of ignorance. Picatrix, book 1, chapter 1 comes right out and says the most valuable gift that God has given is knowledge. We just don't want to stop with conceptual knowledge. We want to go from conceptual knowledge, then to practical knowledge, then to wisdom, which is the deep understanding of action, and then finally to embrace paradox and mystery, and to seek not just to know, but to be, and that truly is gnosis. So I think that's, an important, I think, understanding. And again, it's conceptual knowledge, but it's something to try to live by and to understand as we pass through magic and astrology, and to not be so sure of ourselves and to not be so positive that we know what's going on, that we understand it completely, but to recognize that that mystery and paradox really are at the root of magic and all the other esoteric arts.